Got a great show here planned for you. Our next guest, I'm going to get to here in just a second, is going to give us a little bit of an update on something that hasn't been talked about as much due to the Secretary of Defense's rogue hospitalization, quiet hospitalization. But the Secretary of State has come out in the last couple days, and he said this.
Israel must be a partner to Palestinian leaders who are willing to lead their people in living side by side in peace with Israel and as neighbors. And Israel must stop taking steps that undercut Palestinians' ability to govern themselves effectively. Extremist settler violence carried out with impunity, settlement expansion, demolitions, evictions, all make it harder, not easier, for Israel to achieve lasting peace and security.
So that's the Secretary of State talking about how Israel needs to partner with Palestinian leaders who are willing to live side by side in peace. Well, let's get to the last quote before we get to our
Palestinian
guest.
civilians must be able to return home as soon as conditions allow. They must not be pressed to leave Gaza. As I told the Prime Minister, the United States unequivocally rejects any proposals advocating for the resettlement of Palestinians outside of Gaza. And the Prime Minister reaffirmed to me today that this is not the policy of Israel's government.
Well, let's see what retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg has to say about this from our Secretary of State. Welcome back to the show, General. We appreciate you being here with us today.
Annie, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Look, I listened to Tony Blinken. This is one of the frustrations that I have here in Washington, D.C., is people tell you all the problems and never give you the solution. And, I could hear him saying you need to do this needs to be done. But they don't give you an end state. Well, how are you going to do this? Who are you going to talk to? Who's the interlocutor that you've got to be able to talk to both the Palestinians and also the Israeli government? And, you talk about these issues, but you don't give me, okay, how do I get out of it? And they're not very good about it. Look, I will tell you how they get out of this is something we realized in the last administration. It's going to have to be economically how they get out of it. You've got to give people a reason to stop killing each other. And part of that is you create an economic environment that they can grow from. If you don't have that kind of environment, they're just going to keep fighting. And the Palestinians, they're the ones who created this problem with Hamas. They're the ones who went into Israel. There was no forces inside Gaza when this happened because Ariel Sharon decades ago pulled them out. And they're the ones who started the assault. And the Israelis, understandably, came back really hard after watching that massacre on 7 October. And their job is to eradicate Hamas, and they've said that. And that's a terrorist organization. And you can't get pushed back on the Israelis. You've got to say to them, look, we kind of get it. We kind of understand what you're doing, and you have to eradicate that political movement of Hamas that is focused in on terror. So I really do get frustrated, Annie. A long comment to a pretty short question. I always get frustrated when I hear the politicians around this town talk, and I just tell them, like you would and anybody else would in the business world and the commercial world, okay, I got it. What's the solution? Well, I don't know. They never give you one.
Yeah.
That's the frustration I've got.
Well, and when there isn't an actual solution to the words that are being said, it feels very political, not policy-based. But what do the people want to hear, and how do we make it so that we can say it, so we can get the credit for it? I'm wondering how this brokered peace that the Secretary of State is trying to reach, how is he getting Palestinian leaders who are willing to live side by side in peace with Israel? Because my understanding is October 6th, maybe I'm wrong, but Israel was living side by side in peace with Hamas next door, and then Hamas is the one who decided to kick the door down, and we know what happened next.
Yeah, it was, Annie. Look, here's how we handled it, and we were criticized in the last administration until it worked. And then they said, it was a good idea. I mean, the whole intent, we went and talked to the Palestinians, and we realized they weren't going to come across and work for peace in the region. You had Fatah, you had Hamas, you had the Palestinian Authority in Abbas, and nobody was really controlling anybody. And we said, look, we're going to go around you. We're going to talk to all the partners. We're going to talk to the Saudis. We're going to talk to the Emiratis. And that's when we came up with the Abraham Accords. And we said to the Palestinians in a briefing that we set up in Bahrain, that, by the way, they refused to attend. And we said, this is the way you get out of it. And it's all based off economics and restructuring and redeveloping Gaza, which is right on the Mediterranean. I mean, you talk about beachfront property, it's right there. And they wouldn't even talk to us about it. So we went around them. And that's when Tony Blair, and I sat next to Tony Blair when the Abraham Accords were signed in the residence, in the White House residence itself, where we had our lunch. I sat right next to him. And he said to me, you guys got this one right. We had it wrong because they said everything has to be done through the Palestinians. No, it doesn't. Bring them across, make them really understand this is how we're going to get things done. Look, you've got one group that's governing Gaza, which is Hamas. They threw out another terrorist group, Fatah, and the Israelis aren't going to work with them. So the question is, how do you do it? It's going to have to be historically, the United States has always been the key interlocutor. That's when, we brought them back to Camp David, the Palestinians and the Israelis or whoever. We took them, in Oslo. We always kind of led the way. That's not happening. So what you're going to see is a lot of talk, but a lot of fighting. And you're going to see the Israelis continue to strike at Hamas until somebody figures a way how to come out of this. And right now, there's no solution. Of course, it's been that way since biblical times.
Yeah.
But we had a way out of it before, and it was just thrown away.
We're speaking with retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg. He's the former National Security Advisor to the Trump administration, the co-chair of the Center for American Security at America First Policy Institute. I guess my assumption here, from what little I know in my frequent talks with you that really helps get me up to speed, is you can't really have a conversation about some sort of peaceful two-state solution and ignore what's going on with Iran, and that this conversation has gotten to this point globally because of American softness towards Iran. Is that still the case?
Yeah, it is, Annie, and it's just not Iran. When you look at it, I mean, very honestly, I'm looking at the world right now, and it's a very complex world right now, and there's a lot of problems in it. I don't care if it's the Far East, where you've got Kim Jong-un with firing off his brand new ICBMs or testing nuclear devices, and you've got China, you've got the Middle East problem that's going on, and then you've got Ukraine and Russia. These are major issues and major problems, and they're on the president's plate and they're on the national security team's plate for the Biden administration. And you just can't whistle past the graveyard with these. You've got to handle them, and you've got to work with them and figure your way either through it or out of the box that you're in. And the longer these go, my experience has been that the longer you let a problem fester, it gets worse. It is harder to put back in the box. Example, when you've got the Houthis shooting at ships and shutting down commerce and basically violating freedom of navigation into the Red Sea, that's a major problem, but we've just kind of ignored it. If you'd shut that down early, things might have been different. You go to the source, which is the Iranians. You do something that's dramatic. What I mean by dramatic, not like a movie dramatic, but something very, very big and hard, then you get people's attention, and they tend to back off. We did that before, and I'm proud to say we did that with Afghanistan. We did that with the Middle East. We looked at each one that was really hard. We attacked each one hard. We made some very tough decisions, some that were filled with risk, but risk is part of the issue. It's part of the problem set. You have to accept risk. Like when we killed Soleimani, we knew there was going to be risk to that, but it quieted down the entire Middle East for over a year. Yeah. So, we worked with Afghanistan and the Doha Agreement. People didn't like the Doha Agreement. No American was killed the last year. And no American was killed in Afghanistan the last year we were in office because we set the process working. And that's how you have to handle it. And it's not being done. And, I mean, they've got more than enough problems to handle right now. And very candidly, and I know it's a harsh assessment, they're not doing very well at it.
Yeah, it really seems that way. And it's hard to look at a map and not see a very close adjacent crisis unfolding across the globe. Let me ask you a broad question. You can answer this however you like. We're speaking with General Keith Kellogg here on the Annie Frey Show. Is America under attack anywhere right now?
Well, when you say under attack, it's an interesting comment. Is there a direct assault other than an open border, which is a national security issue? And I talked to somebody today. I said, really, where there's no border in the South, that's an attack on our national liberty. So that you under attack in what you're looking at illegal immigration and it coming across the southern border, that's under attack. But if you're talking kinetic attack, no. But if you're talking economic attack, sure we are. If you're talking diplomatic attack, sure we are. So people wouldn't say is America under attack. People tend, Annie, to think immediately of something kinetic, a war. Mm-hmm. But it's much more than that, because when you look at national security, it's a very broad area. You just can't define it militarily. Because when I was in the national security arena, you had to look at it militarily, you had to look at economically, you had to look at diplomatically, and a lot of that was based on the people that were in the leadership positions. So that's a broad question, My answer would be generically the answer is yes, because we're under assault. Our values are under assault. We have soldiers under assault in the Middle East. We have our borders being assaulted as well. So it's one of those, it's how you define it, and I define it pretty broadly. So now I'll close the circle. The answer is yes.
Yeah. Yeah. We're speaking with the retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg. You were the former national security advisor to the Trump administration, and the world did not look like this when Donald Trump was in office. It was just a different time, and there was a lot of attention to those different types of things that you were pointing out. A lot of people think being attacked is like a hot war where everybody sees it, knows it, can identify it and say, yes, this is very bad. But a lot of the strength that was imposed throughout the world, American strength, was based through economic efforts by the Trump administration. What has the Biden administration done with those efforts by the Trump administration? And let's say a Donald Trump or somebody who likes that America First agenda, if they were to win in November of 2024, what could they do to what Joe Biden has done to what Trump did?
Yeah, and another great question, Annie, because you almost have to reset the battlefield. What I mean by reset, because they're not doing anything. And it goes back to what Blinken said earlier. There's a lot of talk, but there's no action behind it. You know, you've got to be able to talk, and then you actually have to execute what you're talking about. And somebody asked me a very similar question. They said, well, how long would it take? I said, you can almost fix it immediately. And they go, what are you talking about? I said, look, your adversaries, and your allies, all look at the leadership in the White House, because that's the prime level of leadership, commander-in-chief level. And if that changes, if you want somebody like a Trump, if he becomes a presumptive nominee of the Republican Party, and then he runs and he wins, well, everybody knows what he did for 4 years. So then everybody starts to reset, because they said, oh, here we go again. We know what happened 4 years. We got a good understanding. And they will recalibrate what they're doing. And the same with the Biden administration. They kind of know what they've got. So the reset can happen almost immediately because of the personalities involved, because all of this is based on leadership. I mean, example, we have a very powerful naval force in the Mediterranean and in the Persian Gulf region. Well, it can be as powerful as you want it to be. But if you haven't got the will to execute or the will to go through and conduct some type of operation, then that powerful military force is feckless. It's not going to be used at all. Nobody's going to worry about it. And the Houthis aren't worried about it. They've said they're going to keep responding. This is an organization that most people the country they can't find on a map, and the leadership they can't figure in Wikipedia. You know, it's one of those, who are these guys? But they're basically shutting down 12% of the world's commerce, infecting freedom of navigation in the Red Sea, and we haven't really done anything about it. They said, well, we stood up a task force called Prosperity Guardian. It hadn't done anything. And here's the problem. People are voting with one, that the merchants are voting with their fleets. They're just not putting them through. But both the Spanish and the Italians and the French all opted out of Prosperity Guardian, and they said, we're going to take care of our own vessels. And the French are escorting their own ships through the Red Sea. That's a lack of confidence in what we're going to do. So, put this all in a big bucket. It's just not a good world to be in right now.
Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. We're speaking with retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg. One last question before we go. You're talking about a lack of leadership, and I think we can see that, of course, in the foreign policy and national security concerns, as well as a lot of domestic issues. Do you have any comments about the Defense Secretary debacle over the course of the last couple weeks? Does that actually cripple our ability to do what we need to do to keep this country safe?
Yeah, because it was a judgment lapse, and it's reckless and irresponsible for what he did. And I know Lloyd Austin, but look, he was one of the two national command authorities. It's civilian control of the military. The president, all the orders go through the president to the Secretary of Defense, and the Secretary of Defense to his combatant commanders. For example, let's use Central Command with Eric Kurilla, the 4-star. It would go from Biden to Austin to Kurilla. That's how it works. When he's not in there, there's nobody in between. So the chain of command is broken down. And that's actually reckless and irresponsible. And Lloyd Austin knows better. And everybody knows better. That's where people are starting to go, oh, how did that happen? You know what? Look, I'll be very honest. When I was on the national security team in the Trump administration, I had my hip replaced. I went in and told the president, Mr. President, I'm going to be out of action for a couple of days. I'm going to be go under a general, get my hip replaced, and come back and say, how are you doing? He didn't even tell the president that. And I just can't fathom that he did that. And we used to always track the Secretary of Defense, because obviously he's important because he's one of the National Command Authorities. He's also sixth in line to the presidency. And you look at this and you go, you can't do that. And the entire chain of command broke. And that's why I think it's really hard for me to understand because they know better. So this was a big miss by them, and it was a judgment lapse. There's a way out of it. I think if I was in the administration, if I was the White House Chief of Staff, I'd walk into Lloyd and I'd say to him, Lloyd, what you need to do is tender your resignation, knowing fully well the president will not accept it. So then you kind of covered half of it. But you've got to say to him, I screwed this up. I'm at fault. I'm at fault in keeping basically the American people safe and ensuring the civilian control of the military. Bad miss.
Well, we will look and see if your advice is taken there. We are very grateful for your time. Thank you for being with us today and weighing in on these issues that are probably the biggest issues facing us right now. Whether the average American understands what's going on, they definitely want to, and you are a great sage in helping us do so.
Thanks, Annie. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Bye-bye. Retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg. He's the former national security advisor to the Trump administration, the co-chair of the Center for American Security at America First Policy Institute. On Twitter, @General Kellogg, 2 L's, 2 G's. Go tell him thanks for being on the Annie Frey Show.